Nevada's rugged landscape is scattered with over 600 ghost towns, serving as a testament to the tumultuous rise and fall of the state's history. The spotlight first shone on Nevada as a territory back in 1858, when the Comstock Lode, a massive silver deposit, was uncovered, the first of its kind in the United States. Within a year, the exhilarating silver rush was in full swing. In 1861, Nevada was separated from the Utah Territory, and just 3 years later, it achieved full statehood, despite falling short of the minimum population requirement. This unconventional move was motivated by President Lincoln's determination to secure the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Nevada's prosperity sparkled as brightly as the silver extracted from its depths, earning it the fitting moniker of the Silver State. Much akin to the earlier California gold rush, Nevada's silver boom gave rise to a multitude of booming towns, thriving in tandem with the flourishing mines. However, as the ore veins ran dry, these once thriving towns met their demise, fading into history as ghost towns of the Old West. Here are famous and the most interesting ghost towns in Nevada, based on their history and the state of preservation of their ruins. Most are easily accessible to visitors today. But before we explore that, please subscribe our channel and like the video. It may cost you nothing, but it'll help us a lot. When gold was stumbled upon in 1889 in the desolate and barren Monkey Wrench Wash by John Ferguson and Joseph Sharp, a frenzy of gold and silver seekers descended upon this isolated region. It didn't take long for a mining camp to spring up just west of the Monkey Wrench mine, and they named it Ferguson in honor of one of the original prospectors. Come April 1894, Captain Joseph Raphael Delmar from Montana stepped into the scene and purchased most of the significant mines in the area. In a bold move, he renamed the camp from Ferguson to Delmar. During the same year, the Delmar Lode newspaper began circulating, and a post office was established. Lamar also constructed a 50-ton mill, which kicked into operation in May of 1895, marking the beginning of growth in the camp. Before you knew it, this fledgling settlement boasted over 1,500 inhabitants, complete with a hospital, an opera house, a couple of churches, a school, a handful of businesses, and of course, the customary assortment of saloons. Most of the structures were crafted from local stone, and even though the camp has long been abandoned, the remnants of these timeless buildings continue to endure. By 1896, the Delmar mill was processing as much as 260 tons of ore each day. The camp sourced its water from a well located at Meadow Valley Wash, a daunting 12 miles away. Supplies and materials had to traverse even more challenging terrain, carried by mule teams from the railroad hub at Milford, Utah, a whopping 150 miles distant from this remote camp. Transporting the precious ore out of the settlement followed the same grueling method. What set the gold in the Delmar mines apart was its occurrence within quartzite. Extracting the gold from the quartzite generated copious amounts of dust, laden with glass-like rock particles. This hazardous dust, inhaled by both miners and townsfolk, often led to a debilitating lung disease known as silicosis. Consequently, the town earned the grim nickname the Widowmaker, due to the numerous premature deaths caused by the disease. At one point, Delmar was home to over 400 widows. Today, the remaining 2 cemeteries in Delmar bear witness to the inscriptions on tombstones that memorialize the victims of this quartz dust. After the turn of the century, gold production began to wane, and by 1902, many of the town's residents had moved on to the burgeoning boomtown of Tonopah. Between 1892 and 1909, over $15 million worth of gold was extracted from the mines, until Captain John R. Delmar dismantled the entire operation, sealing the town's fate. Delmar did experience a brief resurgence in 1929 when production briefly resumed. The post office and school were reopened, but this revival was short-lived. Production ceased once again in 1934, and the town met its final demise. Time, the elements, and vandals have all taken their toll on the remnants of Delmar. Just a few years ago, several of the old stone buildings were still standing. Regrettably, according to a local resident, These historic structures have been systematically dismantled, stone, by vandals searching for hidden treasures. Nevertheless, these decaying ruins, along with the tailings and old mining structures, continue to beckon ghost town enthusiasts and photographers to this remote location. Gold Hill, this here mining camp, kicked off around the same time as Virginia City, back in the late 1850s, when folks stumbled upon both silver and gold in these parts. In the beginning, this camp was little more than a handful of miners bunking in tents and rickety shacks. But by the early 1860s, it was giving Virginia City a run for its money, matching it in size and folks calling it home. They even went and made it official by incorporating the town in December 1862, just so Virginia City wouldn't go annexing it. For a couple of decades that followed, this place was buzzing with life, boasting around 8,000 residents at its peak. Mines like the Yellow Jacket, Crown Point, and Belcher were spitting out over $10 million each. This town was a real stopover on the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, and you could find plenty of businesses, churches, schools, and a bunch of firefighting outfits. But when them mines started drying up in the late 1870s, this town started withering away. They tried to breathe some life back into those mines here and there, like the Yellow Jacket mine that chugged along from 1927 to 1942. But when even that didn't cut it no more, folks packed up and left in droves. By the next year, the post office done shut its doors. Now, Gold Hill ain't much more than a ghost town, home to less than 200 souls. But you can still find a handful of them old-timey buildings holding their ground. Most famous of them all is the Gold Hill Hotel, built back in 1859, and it's the oldest still-kicking hotel in the whole state. Then there's the Virginia and Truckee Railroad Depot, built in 1872 and back in action now, serving as the ticket office for that reborn V&T Railroad. You'll spot the old Bank of California building too, put up in 1862. Over the years, it's been home to all sorts of businesses, and today it looks like some folks are using it as an office of some kind. All around the area, you'll come across remnants of the mining days, like the Yellow Jacket mine shaft and head frame, and the Crown Point Mill. And if you take a little jaunt up the hill, you'll hit Virginia City, the big shot of the Comstock Lode, Bellman Ghost Town, Nevada. Back in 1865, a Native American struck silver gold in the heart of Nevada, deep in them Toquima Mountains. Well, that discovery set off a wild stampede of folks rushing to the area. Seemed like towns just sprung up out of nowhere, and one of the big players in that show was Belmont. Now, it's a bit fuzzy how big Belmont really was, but folks reckon it had around 4,000 souls hunkering down there between 1866 and 1867. Some folks, though, they spin tales of 10,000 folks roaming around. Either way, Belmont snagged itself the title of Nye County seat back in 1867. Belmont was a real hotspot in its heyday, with about 10 mines working round the clock and 6 mills chugging away to get that silver all purdied up. By the 1870s, Belmont had itself a bit of everything: a fancy red light district, a racetrack, some churches, schools, and even a Chinatown, because folks of all kinds made their way there. But kind of like a tumbleweed blowing away in the wind, Belmont's fortune started fading fast when a new gold rush hit Gold Mountain in 1880. That drew folks and their dollars away. And if that weren't enough, the Belmont Mining Company went and sold off its property in 1887. By the time 1903 rolled round, there were just 36 folks left on Belmont's voter list. It's become one of them famous ghost towns of Nevada, and you can still see the history in the ruins of a 2-story brick courthouse, built back when they thought they had a bright future ahead. Belmont's got itself a spot on Nevada's list of historic places, and they're working hard to keep the old place alive. They're hoping to draw folks back to the site, keeping the spirit of Belmont alive and kicking. Tybo Ghost Town, Nevada. Out yonder on the eastern slopes of the Hot Creek Range, down in Nye County, there lies a place called Tybo. This here town officially kicked off back in 1874, and by the time 1877 rolled round, it was sitting pretty with a whopping 250 tons of silver rolling out of there every month. But, like many of them other silver towns in Nevada, once the mines started to run dry around 1879, Tybo started to wither away just like a tumbleweed caught in a desert gust. Now, Taibo's got itself a story that sets it apart from the other ghost towns in these parts. Back in 1876, it found itself in the middle of an ugly mess they called the Chinese War. You see, there weren't enough folks to do all the work, so they hired Chinese woodcutters and paid them the same as the white workers. Well, that didn't sit well with some of the white folks, and they formed a group called the Working Men's Protective Union. These fellas, they stormed the Chinese camp armed with guns and bullwhips, scaring them Chinese workers right out of there. Now the company tried calling the Chinese workers back, but things just got worse. Violence was dang near brewing, but them Chinese workers, fed up with the whole mess, said they'd up and leave if someone paid for their stagecoach fare to Eureka. The Anti-Asiatic League of Taibo, they coughed up the cash. Nowadays, Taibo's just a quiet place with a handful of folks calling it home. You can still see the foundations of them old buildings, and them charcoal kilns they used back in the day are on the list of historic places. Out yonder in them White Pine Mountains, you'll find one of Nevada's silver mining ghost towns that really took a tumble. Goes by the name of Hamilton, and it was born in 1868. Now, within a year of its birth, Hamilton was sitting pretty with 60 stores, 100 saloons, and even a couple of brew joints. For the more civilized folks, they had themselves some churches, schools, theaters, and even a roller skating rink. In 1869, the place was bustling with round 12,000 folks, and there were another 13,000 miners scattered round the hills nearby. It even got picked as the seat for the newfangled White Pine County. Silver was pouring in like a river, fueling that wild boom, but it also brought in a heap of trouble. Stagecoach holdups happened about twice a week, no kidding. And with all that shiny specie floating around, corruption was spreading like wildfire, as Wild West's own Leigh Kruger would tell you. Then, wouldn't you know it, the mine that was feeding all this frenzy ran dry faster than a desert creek in summer. Come 1870, Hamilton was down to less than 4,000 folks, and by 3 years later, it was down to a measly 1,000. That year, with the town just about on its last legs, a fella who sold tobacco decided to cash in on the insurance money. To make sure his plan worked, he shut off the town's water supply and set his place ablaze. Well, that fire turned into a real humdinger and wiped out the whole town, causing $600,000 worth of damage. Then, in 1885, another fire came along and finished off the courthouse and all its records. And that, my friend, was pretty much the end of the line for Hamilton. Nowadays, all that's left are a few scattered ruins and the walls of the Withington Hotel. One of them, Nevada Ghost Towns, got its start back in 1859 as a Pony Express station, right along the banks of the Shell Creek. Now, things didn't exactly kick off smooth as molasses for this station. In 1860, a bunch of Paiute folks paid it a visit and things took a real ugly turn. They raided the place, taking down the station master and 2 of the workers. Well, that sure ruffled some feathers, and the army decided to set up shop there. But by 1862, it looked like the Paiute trouble was simmering down, so they up and left. In that stretch, when the Pony Express was riding its last trail in 1861, the Overland Express took over, making this station a real hot spot for stages. But the Overland decided to hit the trail in 1869. Then, just when you thought things were calming down, a prospector went and struck silver in 1871. Shelbourne perked right up, growing into a town of 400 folks. They had saloons, stores, and even a Wells Fargo office setting up shop. But wouldn't you know it, the next year, they found even more silver nearby, and that started a stampede out of town. Shelbourne held on for a spell, trudging through the 1920s with fewer than 20 folks still calling it home. By the time the late 20th century rolled around, that old Pony Express station was crumbling like a dried-up biscuit, and they had to tear it down. But you can still find some ruins hanging around, although some of them are sitting on private land, mind you. Back in 1867, a heap of silver was found in the Goose Creek Range, and that gave birth to a brand new town they decided to call Tuscarora. They got the name from a ship, the USS Tuscarora, of all things. Now, Tuscarora stood out from your typical Nevada ghost town. Once the railroad chugged its way into the area, around 2,000 Chinese folks joined the mining action and decided to set up shop in Tuscarora. Would you believe it, at one point, Tuscarora had a Chinatown that was only second to San Francisco in size? Now, alongside the mining gig, these Chinese newcomers dealt in silk, tea, and even gathered sagebrush to stoke those furnaces and keep the mills going. But hold on to your hat, partner, because like any old West town, Tuscarora had a bit of a dark side. They had opium dens, gambling joints, and places for, well, let's just say, entertainment. But don't be fooled, the town had a fancy veneer too. They had skating rinks, schools, and theaters. Yet underneath all that civility, there was a fair share of trouble brewing. Miners were known to settle their differences with a good old-fashioned knife fight, especially them Cornish miners they called Cousin Jacks. Now, Tuscarora's luck took a nosedive in 1877 when silver prices went belly up and the mines were flooding like a bathtub without a plug. By the early 20th century, folks had pretty much cleared out, but there was always a little something going on. In 1966, they set up shop with the Tuscarora Pottery School and Retreat, saying the remote location was just perfect for getting creative. Believe it or not, that place is still kicking today. So if you're in the mood for some clay spinning and taking a gander at some well-preserved old buildings, Tuscarora might just be your kind of spot. Rhyolite went through the full lifespan of a boom and bust town in just over a decade. Created after Shorty Harris and E.L. Cross discovered quartz laden with gold in 1904, the desert town, which got its name from the silica-filled volcanic rock, sprung into existence almost overnight in Nye County. One 3-story building was erected and a stock exchange built. Rhyolite also featured hotels, stores, schools, and the inevitable red light district. The town even had electricity. The citizens of the town were also the social and creative sort, performing operas, conducting sports, and holding socials. One miner named Tom Kelly even built a house out of 50,000 bottles. There was a financial panic in 1907, and in 1911 the mine was shut down. The power was turned off in 1916. Rhyolite now holds some of the most impressive ghost town ruins in the state, including the remnant of the 3-story bank. It can still be visited, just be wary of the heat. It's located in Death Valley National Park. Last ghost town in our video is Metropolis. Metropolis is quite the peculiar ghost town in Nevada, you see, because it had nothing to do with them mines. This here town is nestled up in northeastern Nevada, right in Elko County. It came to be in 1910, thanks to the Pacific Reclamation Company from the Big Apple, New York. Now, these folks had themselves a mighty big idea. They aimed to build a perfect community all centered around farming and such. They had this grand vision, see? A place where about 7,500 folks could live in harmony. They planned out a right proper downtown with all the fancy amenities you could think of. Shoot, they even dreamed up an amusement park. And let me tell you, things got off to a good start. The population climbed to about 2,000 folks. But then, the 1930s rolled in, and it was like a whole mess of bad luck came knocking at their door. First, them jackrabbits came along and chomped down on their crops. Next, typhoid started spreading like wildfire because of poor sanitation. And as if that weren't enough, them pesky Mormon crickets showed up. And to top it all off, in 1936, a big ol' fire came and burned down the town's only hotel. But you know, the town might have pulled through if it weren't for the lack of water. This part of the land didn't see much rain, and the company tried to build a darn dam to redirect water from Bishop Creek, one of them streams that feeds into the Humboldt River. But Metropolis found itself in one heck of a legal showdown over water rights with Lovelock, a town way downstream nearly 200 miles away. Well, I reckon you can guess who won that showdown. Yup, you got it. Metropolis lost out. And just like a plaque they got at the site says, the town ultimately died of thirst. If you mosey on over to Metropolis today, you'll find a heap of ruins, including that near-fallen-apart Lincoln School and a graveyard to boot.